My nephew told me that I was his biggest fantasy, and I had no choice but to play along. What I'm about to tell you happened very recently, less than 6 months ago. I'm still living under the adrenaline of the events, which I never imagined I would have to go through. I took the initiative to talk about what happened here after reading about an experience similar to mine. I was very impressed by what I read, and learning about what happened between them has done me good because, as well as encouraging me to tell what I went through, it has shown me that I am not the only person to make what I consider to be a mistake, and what makes me feel like a very confused woman. My name is Daisy. I'm 47 years old. I'm a lawyer, and throughout my life, I've always seen myself as a serious, responsible woman. I've been a devoted wife for 24 years and a present mother. The image I always passed on to others and to myself was that of someone unshakable, immune to distractions or temptations. For me, marriage was a sacred commitment, a fortress of respect and trust. Never for a moment did I imagine that my life would take such an unexpected turn. I never imagined myself capable of deviation, let alone breaking with everything I had built. Until that day. What happened, and how it happened, is still difficult to process, like an avalanche that forms slowly, almost imperceptibly, but which, when it arrives, sweeps everything away. It wasn't planned, and perhaps that's why it was so overwhelming. In my law firm, there were only 3 professionals: me, my older sister, and another lawyer. The dynamic between us was very familiar, almost as if we were in a closed circle. My sister, unlike me, was always more extroverted, uncomplicated, throwing herself into situations with an energy that I admired, but didn't know if I could emulate. She was 49 and had 3 children: Alex, aged 28, Margaret, 24, and Andrew, the youngest, aged 22. I always saw my nephews as the children I didn't have, but it was hard for me to imagine myself in a scenario that went beyond the role of aunt. About 6 months ago, on a Sunday that seemed like any other, I went to my sister's house to work. My husband drove me there very early, and as usual, we said goodbye with a hasty kiss and a promise that he would pick me up later, when we had finished the day's chores. I didn't know it, but fate was already setting up a situation that would change my life. The day passed slowly, and as always, I was absorbed in my work. My sister's house was a cozy place, full of familiar noise, the sound of children running around the house, quick conversations, laughter, and the aromas of Sunday food in the oven. My sister was busy with her things, and the older ones, Alex and Margaret, had their own routines. Andrew, the youngest, was at home, but I hadn't paid much attention to him earlier in the day. After all, it was just another ordinary Sunday, or so I thought. Time flew by, and in the late afternoon, already tired, I picked up the phone to give my husband an update. It was then that he told me he was having trouble picking me up as planned. Some problem with the car, a meeting that had been extended. Anyway, I had to get ready. Without much else to do, I started to think of alternatives. Then Andrew appeared in the living room, offering to drive me. "I'll take you, Auntie. No problem at all," he said with his typical relaxed smile. At first, I didn't think twice. He was a good boy, always very polite and helpful. Besides, the distance to my house wasn't that far. He offered so naturally that there was no reason to be suspicious. But there, that afternoon, when he drove me to my car, something in the atmosphere changed. It wasn't an obvious or explicit change, but something in the air seemed different, as if the wind had turned, taking with it all the lightness I had imagined my life had. It was fate preparing the play that was going to apply to me. When we got out, I noticed that he was elated to be able to drive. We started talking, and he said that his age was a bad time, because he already knew a lot about life, but that his mother and father didn't allow him to live it. At first, he talked about traveling, about girlfriends, until he shot out like an arrow the sentence that almost made me faint with surprise and fright. "I'm not as easily satisfied as I used to be, Aunt. The only thing that keeps me going is a fantasy I have about you. A simple thing, you know?" I was perplexed. "What do you mean, Andrew? What kind of fantasy? What do you mean, boy? That's the way you're thinking, Auntie." Then he started complimenting me nonstop. Perhaps thinking that my silence was a sign of approval, He went on to tell me more, including saying that he was relieved to think of me. Many times, Auntie, when I'm with my girlfriend, I think that you're there in her place. I remained silent. As it was Sunday night, the streets were absolutely deserted. He parked the car in a darker place and, showing a certain fear of the moment, said, "Auntie, if you want, I'll start the car and we'll go. All I ask is that you don't tell Uncle Richard and Mom about what happened, but I'd like to stay for a minute and talk about it," he said, looking me in the eye. "Okay, Andrew, but make it quick. You know how crazy everything you're telling me is. Say everything you have to say and then we'll go. And then we'll forget everything we've said, okay? Okay, Aunt Daisy. It's important for me to finish talking about this. No other woman my age arouses the desires that you do. Everything about you makes me crazy with passion." A car passed us. I followed the car with my gaze to make sure they hadn't seen anything. "Say something to me, Auntie. Say it the way I'm going to say it to you now, so I can save the sound of your words and use them in my fantasy nights." I confess that by this time I was getting very aroused, but I still held back. "What do you want me to say, Andrew?" He told me the words, and I looked deep into his eyes and felt that there was no disrespect in his request. So in quick words, I said what he asked me to say. "Go on, Andrew. Your aunt wants everything." His eyes sparkled, then he said, "How I wish you were really asking for it. Tell me again, Auntie." So I did, and his eyes lit up again. His document was already almost unbelievably huge. A military police car came around the corner, attracting my attention. I looked at my watch and saw that we had been there for almost half an hour. At that moment, I asked him to go. He started the car, got out, and after a short silence, said something that confirmed my earlier impression. "Auntie, I want you to understand me. There's not a shred of disrespect in what I said. It's human nature." He spoke politely. I was surprised again by the way he handled the subject. He continued, "By chance, you're my aunt, but because you're married and older, that stimulates me even more." I listened without understanding where he learned to talk like that. At only 22, his words and reasoning were intelligent and cultured. I'm sure he was influenced by Joyce, who was always intelligent and cultured, and passed on the habit of reading to her son. He stopped at a traffic light. We were already on a busy street, and said he was going to ask for something, but that he'd left it until we were on a busy street, to show me he wasn't trying to force anything. I was a little annoyed because I thought the situation was coming to an end, but I still asked him what it was. What he asked came like a gale in my head, but again he was eloquent when he spoke, engaging me with arguments that led me to agree. It's just that I have in my brain, the first of which you don't know, is the image of you on the beach. I keep it like a photograph. The times I've seen you in the pool and on the beach. The second one you gave me today, I'll keep those words engraved in my mind. At first, I didn't quite understand what he wanted, so I asked, "What do you mean, Andrew?" And he replied, "I wanted to get closer and smell you, Auntie." Even though I felt he was going too far, I agreed. He turned around and walked back the way we had come, about 3 blocks before. It was 2 or 3 minutes of silence. He parked and turned off the car. Then he began to come closer. "Aunt Daisy, today is the happiest day of my life." I gave him a slight smile and kissed his hand lightly. He was a little shaky. My thoughts were far away, and I didn't know what to make of the situation. I was trying to explain to myself why I was allowing it. Then, in a low but firm voice, he asked, "Will you let me kiss your mouth?" The words hung in the air for a second, defying reason and what I knew to be right. Before I could even process the question, he approached with a speed that took me by surprise, forcing me to face what was about to happen. The kiss was something completely unexpected. There was no softness or hesitation, but an urgency, a need that seemed to come from somewhere deep and primal. It was as if he knew exactly where to touch me, how to make every move, as if everything in me was ready to give in, to surrender to something I couldn't control. My mind screamed. My reason tried to resist, but desire overwhelmed me in a way I had never known. It was overwhelming, out of control, but at the same time completely irresistible. I found myself lost in the sensation of his touch, the pressure of his lips, the explosion of sensations that ran through my body like an electric current. The kiss was quick, intense, with no room for doubt. and without me even realizing it, we were taken to the back of the car, where the cramped space seemed to amplify the tension even more. The world outside seemed to have disappeared. All that existed now was the heat of the moment. Time dragged on in a distorted way, each second becoming more and more intense, as if the clock had stopped. 20 minutes or maybe less, but it was enough to turn everything around us into a blur, a mixture of sensations without explanation. It was as if the life I knew had gone up in smoke, and in its place something new, dangerous and wild had emerged. In my daily life, which I had always led with such zeal and dedication, I had never imagined that something like this could happen. I was a wife, a mother, a faithful woman with a deep commitment to my world. But there, at that moment, everything seemed to fall apart. The idea of forbidden pleasure, of the impossible, became a reality that was hard to ignore. I knew that what was happening had no logical justification. It wasn't something I could explain to anyone. It wasn't something that fit the mold of morality that I had always defended. But at the same time, there was a force much more powerful than my reason. It was as if I had been swept up in a whirlwind of emotions and sensations that I couldn't control. My body seemed to know what it wanted even before my mind understood. And when it was all over, my head was full of questions, doubts, and fears. The fear of being found out, the fear of facing the consequences of something that couldn't be undone. But there was also something else, something I could no longer ignore, a strange and delicious sensation, a certainty that I had touched something that was mine, something that was there, latent, that moment. The fear of being caught, of losing everything I had built, of not knowing how to look into the eyes of the people I loved most, was mixed with the realization that something much greater had been awakened within me. It was confusing, yes, but it was also real. I didn't know how to go on, but I knew I couldn't go back. I found myself in a dilemma, an internal struggle between what was right and what instinct told me to do. The pleasure was undeniable. The adrenaline, the sensation of something forbidden, was mixed with guilt, fear, and the need to hide what had happened. At no point was there any logical explanation for what happened between my nephew and me. Everything happened as an instinctive reaction, an impulse that arose from a deep and uncontrollable place inside me. Reason, consciousness, were completely eclipsed by the whirlwind of sensations that invaded my body. It was as if something had awoken, an uncontrollable fire that consumed me without warning, without explanation. I gave myself completely to the moment, without question, without thinking. I just entered my nephew's fantasy, to make it real. Something in me knew that there was no turning back, that there was no room for regret there, and deep down, I also knew that this experience wasn't a mistake. It was part of me, something that had always been there, but which I had never recognized, something that revealed itself in a visceral way, and as much as I tried to deny it, I knew I could no longer ignore it. The feeling was overwhelming. My mind tried to find any justification, any reason for what I had done, but there was no way. Everything was lost in the intensity of what I felt. Every cell in my body was vibrating with an energy that I didn't know where it came from. The pleasure still reverberated through my veins, but there was also a tiredness, an exhaustion, as if every bit of me had been consumed by the experience. I felt free and drained at the same time, as if I had crossed an invisible line that now separated me from everything I knew. It was as if what I had experienced was a secret shared only by me, and that now my nephew shared the same secret. A weight that only the two of us had on us. I couldn't deny that something had changed inside me, an uncomfortable truth that had settled in the back of my mind, something that challenged me to look at myself in a different way, as if the experience had revealed a side of me that I had never recognized, something that messed with my limits, with what I thought was possible and acceptable. I didn't know how to deal with this new discovery, but I knew I couldn't go back. The fear of being discovered accompanied me, not like a shadow, but like a constant weight. I knew that from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same. That experience, with all its whirlwind of sensations and emotions, had changed something in me. It had left me with an emptiness that I didn't know how to fill, but that I could no longer ignore. The pain, the pleasure, the freedom, everything was mixed up inside me, like a new reality that I had to accept. I knew that somehow, what I had experienced at that moment would change the course of everything. It wasn't something that could be erased or forgotten. It was an indelible mark, something that now defined me in a way that I still couldn't fully understand. And while the tension still enveloped me, with that taste of something lost, and at the same time irreversible, I knew that I would never be the same, not just because of what I had done, but because of what it had revealed in me, something I would never have imagined being able to touch, but which now felt like part of me, something that could never be undone. It's not over yet. Click on the cards and keep going.